in a new creation pattern is this general situation. You've got God's person going through water, being placed on a mountain with God to walk with him. So, you've got God's person coming through water, placed on a mountain to walk with him. Okay? And water is affiliated with what happens when a woman gives birth? Her water breaks, okay? So you got this concept woven into creation and procreation itself, where you've got a person coming through water, placed upon a mountain where they fellowship with God. Okay. We've seen that so far with Adam, correct? So Adam is taken through the water, through the early waters of creation. He's placed upon Mount Eden where he walks with God. Okay, so this is the paradigm that is meant to be culminated in Christ. But it happens time and time again throughout the scriptures. Where do we see it? Let's think of some people. What about Noah? God's man, water, Ararat, builds an altar. You see that? Okay, this is a little lesser known, but Abram, he's called out of Haran. Joshua 24, 2 and 3, he passes through the river Euphrates, which is reminiscent back of Eden. The Euphrates is present there. And ultimately, the big moment that he's brought to is he's brought to the promised land. Anytime you go to Jerusalem, you go up, and he brings Isaac to Mount Moriah, which is like the culmination of Abram's experience with God. Okay? So you got Jacob coming back from Laban. He passes through the river Jabbok, where he wrestles with the angel of the Lord. And then he ultimately ends up in Bethel, which is called the house of God. You've got Moses taken out of the Nile and brought to Horeb, which is Sinai, where he learns about walking and worshiping with God. Then you've got Israel. Moses foreshadowed Israel's experience, because Israel comes through the Red Sea, is taken to Sinai, where they learn how to worship. And so this happens again and again. You've got Israel, they go through the Jordan. They're ultimately brought to Moriah, where the temple is built. You've got Jesus going through the Jordan in his baptism, taken to the Transfiguration, Mount Transfiguration, and ascending where he walks with God. And then where does this happen with us? Where's our rebirth moment where God takes us through water to a mountain where we walk with him? He takes us through the waters of baptism to, Hebrews 12 says, Mount Zion, where we participate in heavenly worship. And so this is just another instance where Genesis is prophetic. It's not just history, it's prophetic history. Okay? Meant to be ultimately fulfilled in Christ. Okay, now when we start breaking into the rest of the book of Genesis, I want you to see Eden's presence throughout. So the narrator doesn't tell you. Do you notice how the patriarchs tend to hang out by trees and hang out by wells and dig wells and all this stuff? That Abraham went and he pitched his tent near the oaks of Mamre or Moreh. There's all this affiliation with trees. He plants a tamarisk tree. Isaac digs wells. Guys, why does the Bible care that you know that? That seems like such an unnecessary detail. Unless what the narrator is saying is, hey, they're replanting Eden. They're hanging out by trees because they are longing for Eden. Notice that they're living in tents. Guys, did houses exist back then? How do we know that from Genesis? Who lived in one? Very poorly. Lot. He went down into Sodom and lived in a house. The houses existed. He had a door that he shut that they couldn't get in through. So this was a city. Their cities existed. But Abraham didn't want a city. He wanted Eden. He wanted the place that was built by God. So you'll find the patriarchs living by trees, digging wells like the river. This is the stuff that you're to watch for. And then the women will be found at the well like Eve. They'll be found on mountains like Eden. So you just got to keep a watch for that. Okay? Eden's presence in Genesis. Image casting. And so what another thing to catch here is that Adam was made in the image of God, but was he complete in that image? Or was he like an infant in that image? Would you say he was complete? Raise your hand. Who thinks he was complete? Like where God wanted him to be, and who thinks he was like infant and needed trained up in being in a full image of God? Who thinks he was complete image of God, perfect, just where God wanted him? Who thinks he needed to be built up? Okay. Genesis 2 is a great example of his faith needed developing in the Eve experience, because he has him name the animals before he gives them Eve. And this is, like I said earlier, a demonstration of how Jesus was trained in obedience. That God gave him moment like that after moment like that, and Jesus continually conformed to what he should have, okay? And this also explains, so image is a spectrum. This is also explained in the fact that after the fall, is man still in the image of God? Yeah, how do we know that? Where do we see after the fall God calling man an image of him? The flood, exactly. That if someone sheds blood, you shed their blood because made in the image of God. So even in his fall, he's the image of God, but he's a very poor reflection of the image of God. But he's still the image of God. So the image of God is the spectrum. And that's why we can talk about sanctification being by degree of glory to the next degree of glory. As we get formed to, what does Paul say? To full maturity in Christ. That's his mission, to present every believer in their most mature form. Okay. And Jesus, of course, made this image. He gives us this image, and the Spirit tweaks it into its final form. Okay, so we've established the theme of rest from Genesis day 2. We've established that Adam and Eve were to live in a state of rest as they cultivate the rest of the earth. That it was to be done in Leviticus 26 fashion, where God goes before them. That's the concept of, I'm going before you. Like I'll send the rains so that you can plant your seeds real easy, I'll go before you into Canaan, and what will I put on those people? The dread of you. So he's going to make them, what does Rahab say when the spies go? We've heard. They're petrified of you. Who did that? God did. He says, I'll go like a hornet, and I'll just scare the bejesus out of them, right? And then they'll be easy to conquer. Okay, so this is what God would do for all creation. And guys, it's what he does for us too. 1 Corinthians 10, in no way are you tempted in a way that God also won't give you a way of escape. So in every situation, God is with us, and he's promising to do wonderful things through us if we will be patient and wait for him to do what he's going to do. And we'll see time and time again throughout the Bible in the Torah where his people don't wait. And as a result of that, they just create total mayhem and chaos. Okay? But he told him to live in the rest of God. So then what you find in Genesis is you find a pattern of God giving people their best gifts while they sleep. Very interesting thing. What is Adam doing when he gets Eve? He's passed out, right? Passed out asleep. What's Abram doing when, after he cuts covenant, what does God do to Abram? He puts a deep, deep sleep on Abram. What's Jacob doing when he gets covenant confirmed, when he's leaving Isaac and Rebekah? He sets up a stone, he goes to sleep, and he sees the angels ascending and descending as he gets covenant confirmed. Jacob's fast asleep. In Genesis 26:4, Isaac gets covenant, it says at night. So you get the impression that Isaac is sleeping when he gets covenant confirmed. When does Joseph get news of his brothers bowing down to him and his mom and dad? In a dream. Okay? So, and then you come to Christ, and what's everybody doing when Jesus is born? Except the shepherds. They're sleeping. It's at night, right? There's no room in the inn. They're sleeping, okay? And then what happens when Jesus resurrects from the grave? It's in the early morning hours, still darkish. People are sleeping. So what you find in the scriptures is that this recurring theme of God does his greatest work when his people are at rest. Okay? So never wake up, guys. Live in the rest of God for the rest of your lives. This is the message of the scripture. And I think the psalmists pick up on this. I won't look them up, but Psalm 127:2, for he loves to give his beloved sleep. Psalm 4, David says, I got these concerns, but you're my joy, and so I'll just lay down and go to sleep. I'll rest in you, God. I'll rest in you. And David has his conscience pricked when he just cuts the garment off Saul's robe. Why? Because that was effort. He was relying on his ability to change Saul's heart towards him. When what should he have done? Just waited and rested in God and let God deliver Saul in whatever way needed to be done. Okay? All right, so that's something to watch for in the rest of the book. And then we have man. Now, what I want you to see with man is that just like God created creation and went from form to fullness, you'll find that those two paradigms match men and women. That men are, which one? Fullness or form? Who was created first? Adam. What happened first in the creation narrative? Form or fullness? So what's Adam? Adam is form. Eve is fullness. Okay? So I think that's a helpful paradigm to think about men and women. So Adam is created first. We see form type things in Adam's life. He classifies the animals. He names and classifies Eve. Those are both form mentions. He's the one that breaks from his family. You'll find that God divides things when he's forming. He's dividing the water from the water in the air. He's dividing darkness and light. He's dividing land and sea. And Adam is the one that breaks, divides from his mother and father, and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. So Adam is dividing and joining. So those are all very form-esque things. He's the one that's given direct information about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When God comes in the garden after the fall, who does he call out for first? Adam. Adam, what happened? Like you were to establish guardianship over this space. What happened? Right? So he's the form. He is the form. And so that's a concept to think about with man, that he's to be responsible. He's to provide, protect. One of the most amazing studies I did in the life of Christ is looking at how Jesus, in his last 2 days of life, cared for his bride. You see them come get him. Well, first of all, he's in the garden with them and he tells them, go and pray so that you might fall not into temptation. Then the guards come and he says, leave them, you want me. And then he's going into the interrogation and Peter denies him. He makes eye contact with Peter, which is incredible. All the stuff that's going on, everything he's going through. He has the presence of mind to make eye contact with Peter, and Peter goes and weeps. And then he goes in there, and then he's carrying his cross, and the women are weeping for him. He says, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves. He gets to the cross. He gives Mary a new son in John and cares for her. He cares for the other thief on the cross. So Jesus is constantly caring for what God's given him, even in his most trying hour. Okay? And then you get to woman, and woman is fullness. So she's created second, just like the luminaries complement the glory of God, just like the birds and fish complement the water and air, just like the land creatures complement the land and vegetation. Woman completes man, right? She's the fullness of man. So she completes him, but she's also fullness in the aspect of she bears children. So she's adding fullness to the earth through that. You'll see throughout Genesis women longing for that fullness. You've got Sarah, who's barren. You've got Rebecca, who's barren. You've got Rachel and Leah that are both dying literally to have children. We'll argue that Rachel does die because she says, give me a child or I. And when does she die? When she's having it. So she wants it in a way that's not healthy. And so you've got this constantly. You've got Hannah and her great desire for a child. So you see this fullness aspect there. You see Adam's glory being in his wife, that the wife is his glory. So in all of these aspects, you've got fullness on the side of the women. And I could say more about that, but we're gonna move on. And then we've got a theme to watch out for: life and death, awake from sleep. You find this kind of overplaying throughout the scriptures. Adam lays down his life to give life to his bride. We've talked about his side being pierced. You've got Christ laying down his life to give life to his bride with his side pierced. You find Joseph is raised up out of the pit to go to Egypt. Then he's raised up out of the pit again in Egypt to give life to the world. You see that? So he comes up from the ground to give life to the world. So you've got this life in death, awake from sleep, happening and playing over and over again. You've got Boaz that wakes up to meet Ruth, okay? And then in Psalm 19, you've got the son waking up and coming out of his chamber to his bride, which is creation. So you have this over and over and over again. And then Jesus, as he's resurrected from the grave, he meets his figurative bride. Who does he meet? Who clings to him? Mary Magdalene, right? And he tells her not to cling to him. But that's reminiscent of Adam waking up to his bride. So you see this concept playing out. And then you've even got some negative aspects of it, where you've got Sisera going to sleep in Jael's tent, and how does he he wakes up in a very unflattering fashion with a tent peg being pounded through his temple. How does Samson wake up? The Philistines are upon you. So so you see it both sides. You see the positive side of like a Boaz waking up to Ruth, and it's beautiful. And then you see Sisera and Samson waking up in a negative fashion. Okay. Any questions on Genesis 2? I'd really love to get through Genesis 3, and I think we might be able to do it. But any questions on 2? So I think she's created on the 6th day, because that's what Genesis 1 says, okay? And so then you've got Genesis 2, which is going back to day 6, okay? And it's showing the process. And so on day 6, Adam was created. And on day 6, God has them classify. I would say it's classify the animals instead of name. Sometimes you run into people who go, how could Adam name, 36 trillion thousand, all of these things. Well, what does he do with Eve? Does he name Eve when he sees her? No, he does not name her. What does he do? He classifies her. He doesn't name her till Genesis 3. So Genesis 3, he says, she's like me. She shall be called Isha, from Ish was she taken. So he's man, she's woman. That's kind of the idea, okay? She's taken from man. So he classifies her, which leads me to think that in the animals, he's classifying. So he's making broad distinctions, not, okay, you're going to be a chameleon, and you're going to be, you're a reptile. That's what I think's happening, yeah. So it's a shorter process, and then that results with, okay, Adam, how do you feel about that? Oh, it's great. These are going to be great teammates, but man, I'd love something a little bit more like me, Now, yeah, so that's the idea there. Yeah, it says. Yeah, so the way I would look at it is that God is speaking he's painting with broad strokes in the creation process, just like he did with Asaias' question. He's painting in clearly in Shaq's question. He's clearly painting with broad strokes because he didn't go into that detail. And so I think the biblical authors are comfortable with a greater degree of ambiguity than we are. We tend to be very, maybe overly detailed. And that's what a lot of these concepts do. He's thinking big picture. He says river, but then there's fountains and wells and lavers. These are all related, but broadly. So I think he's a little bit more comfortable with that. Is the best way I could say it. Okay? All right, let's jump into Genesis 3. Because, man, if we could get through this, and guys, listen, if you're tired, I promise you, you will just really relish if we can get through Genesis 3. So let's pound it, okay? All right, so here we go. Genesis 3, serpent. You've got to read Genesis 3 after having just come from Genesis 2. What did Adam just do in Genesis 2? He just received Eve, but what did he do before that? Right before it. He classified the animals, right? And so what you have then is he classified the animals, and what does it tell you about the serpent? That of all the beasts of the field, the serpent was the most crafty. So Adam seems to know this. Okay, and so the serpent comes to him, and he's the highest of the beastly creatures. We tend to think of that as like the lion and stuff, but as far as craftiness and wisdom, it's this serpent. Okay, and this makes us think of, how does Satan come? Paul say, as an angel of light. And so you see a little bit of that in the animal he chooses to come as. He comes as the highest animal. He comes as an angel of light. You sort of see that. Okay. And then what's important, just to throw out there, is What happened with the fall, Paul tells us in Romans, is what Adam and Eve screwed up here is that they did not honor God and give him thanks. That ultimately, what was wrong in this moment that led to the fall of mankind was a twofold problem: an honoring problem and a thankfulness problem. Those are the two problems. And my guess is that because Adam had crystal clarity at what was happening here. Crystal clarity. There's no confusion. He knew firsthand everything that the serpent was saying was dead wrong. He knew it. He heard it from God. Adam was way brighter than we are. He had no sin. So Adam is crystal clear on what's happening. What do you think Adam honored above God in this moment? Also read this in light of Genesis 2. His wife. That's what he did. He just got an exceptional gift. And he honored her above God, is where I think the text indicates. Okay? So, the serpent comes, he's crafty, he speaks false words, his head should have been crushed, just like the priests kill anybody that approaches the temple complex wrongly. Should have been crushed, should have been killed, he should have been run through. He doesn't do it. He lets him speak. Okay. And so what you find here is the heart of Satan, okay? Because look at if we had to say, okay, what's the order of God from Genesis 1 and 2 when it comes to man, woman, God, animals? What's the overall order of God? What comes first in those four things I just mentioned of man, woman, God, and animals? What's the highest? God. What comes next? Huh? Man. What comes next? Woman. And what's the lowest? Okay. And look at what Satan does. Whoop. Animal. Who does he speak to? Who's with her? And who's being trounced? God. So this is the serpent's heart. Guys, he wants to completely turn upside down the world. So we see this happening in real time in the U.S., right? So he begins by upsetting the order in the church between men and women as far as who should be pastors. And the big thing in the U.S. is that women are pastors now, okay? So he does that. And then what tends to happen with that is it distorts the word of God, because Paul speaks really clearly about that. So the word of God is messed with. And then you can see this happen in church after church after church. And then guess what they start loosening up on next? Male-female distinctions in the sexual realm. So then homosexuality is tolerated. Like, I drive past a church every morning that has a huge sign in the LGBT colors that all are welcome here in that. And you don't have to change your lifestyle. Like, that's what happens next. And then it moves to transgender, and it just keeps going. Like, Satan wants to completely turn everything upside down. He did it in the garden. He's doing it today. So he turns it upside down, and as a result, he turns the spiritual relationship between God and man upside down. He turns the mankind-animal relationship upside down in the enmity between animal kingdom and man. He turns the husband or the wife against her husband, the husband against her wife. He turns, mankind was to rule the earth, but now who will get the last word? Dust or man? Dust. He'll return to dust. He was to rule the dust. You see this in the garden where he's to protect the garden, and what ends up protecting him in the fall narrative? What does he hide behind? The trees. He's supposed to be protecting the trees. He's supposed to be guarding the garden. He ends up hiding behind it. So that gets turned upside down. Guys, Paul will say that we are to judge the angels. That we are to judge the angels. And as a result of that, who's judging man when we're pushed out of the garden? The two cherubs, the cherubim are judging, right? And so you see Satan come in and completely distort. He turns absolutely everything upside down in the garden of God's created order. Okay, so then you see eating equals intimacy. So Nathaniel, would you look up Song of Songs for me? And Song of Songs, chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 3 to 7. Okay. So, guys, what do you see intertwined here? What's she talking about? Is she talking about eating fruit with her lover in a garden? Is that what she's talking about? Or is she talking about enjoying or looking forward to enjoying sexual intimacy? But it's all said in the guise of eating. Do you see that? So this is at play in the garden. And we know this because when Eve eats of the fruit, what does God say to the serpent in the judgment? Yeah, he talks about the dust, but he also talks about the serpent's what? Offspring. So whatever Eve did in the garden resulted in what? Offspring. Do you see that? Now, of course, it's not physical, but it's spiritual offspring, that the seed of the serpent will be against the seed of the woman. You see what I'm saying? So as a result of Eve eating with the serpent, it results in offspring. Okay, so that's what you have to catch. All right? And so eating is intimacy. And Josh, I believe, is going to write an article here soon that Jesus essentially undoes this, okay? Because Jesus also has a meal with Satan in undoing what Satan did. Where does Jesus have that meal? At the Last Supper. And where's Satan? What does he say to Judas? Or what does it say about Judas? That the serpent entered, Satan entered Judas. Do you remember that? And then he goes out. So in a meal, just like Eve had with the serpent, so Jesus will have with the serpent to undo what the serpent did. Do you see the beauty in that? How he overcomes what the serpent did in eating, through eating with the serpent? Okay. And then Brian Motes points out that Jesus will be nailed to a tree like a piece of fruit. Do you see that? So he's nailed to a tree. He's like a piece of fruit. So even in that, it's pictured that Jesus is undoing everything in the fall, through the fall. Okay. All right, now, we want to look at, the fall in close view here. So, first of all, just some things to think about. When Satan leaves Jesus from tempting him in the wilderness, Luke includes something that the other gospel writers don't. And what does he say? That Satan left him until an opportune time. Okay? So Jesus left him until an opportune time, which gives you Satan's strategy that he looks for opportune times. Okay? And guys, what you'll find as we start going through the Torah is that time and time again, after God establishes rest, his people fall. It's a really weird thing. When does David sleep with Bathsheba? When he didn't need to go out to war anymore because his kingdom was established. When does Solomon start multiplying wives? Right after God established rest in the temple and his house. So amazingly, an opportune time is after rest is established. And that's what happens. When does Israel make a golden calf? Right after he established rest, bringing them out of Egypt, right? So all of these things, happen. So what is opportune about the garden? Well, he doesn't come as an angel, which could be intimidating. He comes as something that that Adam just named or classified. So Satan doesn't come to Adam as a teacher or a higher authority. He comes to him as a student. Do you see that? He just classified the serpent. So the serpent comes to him as a student. He's okay being under Adam. Do you see how crafty that is? Okay. Does he start with a statement or a question? With a question. That's much less authoritative than a statement. A statement's authoritative. It's man against man. Hey, what's going on here? I'm saying something to you. What do you say? But a question is very, very crafty. All right? It's you tell me the answer. I'm under you. Okay? Then you've got Eve, who's less familiar with the animals. Adam classified them. Eve didn't. Okay? And Eve didn't receive the direct command from God to not eat from the tree. Adam's the one that received that. Would you say at this point that Adam has more faith than Eve? Or less faith? What should he have? What have we been talking about with Jesus growing in obedience? Like, did Adam sin in the Eve process? No, because the fall would have happened then, right? He didn't sin. So he went through not having Eve and then getting Eve, which would have built his faith. Guys, if you obey God on something and then you see how God rewards you with himself, what does that build? It builds faith. So Eve hasn't had as much of a walk with God as had Adam, which made her a prime target. Then, has Eve experienced life without Adam? Yes or no? No. Has Adam experienced life without Eve? So maybe who appreciates who more? Adam's really grateful for Eve. We know that from when he got her. This at last, right? Okay. And then interestingly, was God present for the fall? Yes or no? As you read the narrative, I'm not talking about omnipresence. Was he there? No, because after the fall, he walks in the garden. Okay? This you'll find happens again with Israel in Mount Sinai when they're building golden calf. Because what gets them starting to want to have a God they can see? He's been up there for 40 days. Where is he? Right? So Moses is gone, and that's when they stumble with the calf. God is apparently not on site here, not walking in the garden, and so there's that commonality too. So does this make it an opportune time for Satan to come in the door? Yes, very opportune. Very opportune. That's how Satan is. So we should keep that in mind personally when we're tempted to sin, right? That Satan chooses a very opportune time to enter. James Boyce points out that the word for devil, one of Satan's names, devil, comes from two Greek terms, dia, which means through, and balo, which means to throw. So put together, devil means to throw through. Okay? Which necessitates something that's together. Because you throw through something that's whole. Right? So the word can mean disrupt. So it's like me throwing a rock through that window. Like it disrupts it. And this is what Satan has done. He's come into a whole, serene, beautiful situation and just busts through it and divides it and destroys the peace between God and man. So this is what Satan's up to. So it'll say about God that in Chronicles, his eyes search to and fro throughout the earth, looking for a heart that's whole towards him, blameless towards him. Well, Satan does the exact opposite. Satan's eyes go throughout the earth looking for something he can divide. Whether that's your inner peace, your friendships, your church, your marriage, he wants to divide and disrupt, okay? So this is what he does. So he comes in, he comes to the fall, and he starts with a question, which is less direct than a statement. And then he says, did God say that you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Now, what did God really say? That you are what? Free to eat This is back in 2:17, 2:16. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Okay, so he says, did God say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? God said the exact opposite. So what is he lessening of God? God's what? Generosity, right? So God, he's poising God to be for them or against them? Against, okay? Eve responds, and that's a huge win. Because now, if Adam's going to correct the serpent, who also does he have to correct? Because Eve says something wrong. She says a lot of things wrong. We'll see in a second. But just remember, now Adam's not going to have to just correct the serpent. He's going to have to correct his wife. What is he going to have to correct about his wife? Okay, she says that we may eat from the trees in the garden. So God said, you're free to eat of any tree in the garden. She lessens it to we may eat from the trees in the garden. So she didn't say we're free, and she didn't say any. Do you see how that's a slight lessening? That she's beginning to take the bait that God is against her instead of for her. Okay? So when you're tempted to sin, guys, we will all start thinking God's against us. He's stealing our joy, not giving joy. Okay, so then it goes on. And she says, but we're not to eat of the tree in the midst of the garden. Was there only one tree in the midst of the garden? Or two? What tree did she not even mention? So all she now sees is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So you'll also find when you're tempted to sin that you'll stop thinking about the generosity of God and what he's already given you. That will disappear. The sin that you want will become this big, and it will eclipse everything, all the blessings he's given. This is the process that's happening. Then she says, but we can't eat from this tree in the midst of the garden, or we can't, what? Touch it. Did God ever say you couldn't touch it? It seems like a weird detail, but it's important, because she's now adding commands that God didn't say. You'll find the same thing at Sinai. When Israel's preparing to meet God at Sinai, Moses will tell them everything God tells them not to do or to do, and then he'll say, and don't go near a woman. And God didn't say any of that. So you'll find that right before a fall, a second fall with Israel, Moses adds a command that wasn't there. And then she says, lest we die. What did God say about whether they would die or not? That in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. So this is another thing you'll find yourself doing when you're tempted to sin. You'll lessen God's generosity. All that you'll see is the sin, and you won't see his blessings. And then you'll start minimizing the consequences. She says, we may die. Do you see? So it's really easy to think of the fall as Satan walking up, knocking them out, and they die, and they sin. But that's not what you find in the text. What you find in the text is it's like a boxing match where Satan's like, crack, and they're like, crack. Like it's a slow knockout. You find things starting to crumble before they fall. And that's where Satan's working. And then the last thing is, and Eve saw that the fruit was good. Now, guys, this is the first time in the creation narrative that we see anybody other than God seeing and calling something good. Do you see that? So God has always been the one, and God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good. The moment a human does that, everything totally falls apart. And then it follows with very quick succession that she took, she ate, she gave, and he ate. which is, remember how I talked about the clean animals chew, like methodically, slowly? What you'll find when God's characters sin in the Torah is it's like boom, 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 boom. It's ravenous. It's just very, Judah walks up to Tamar when she's guised as a prostitute, and he says to her, let me go in you. Like, it's just like, ew. It's just so like aggressive and carnal and beastly, right? There's no sophistication. There's no patience. There's no grace. There's no like ease. It's just carnal, okay? So, and you see that. She took, she ate, she gave, he ate. Okay, and so what we then go on to see is that this will circulate over and over and over throughout the Torah. The sons of God will see that the daughters of men were beautiful and they'll take. You'll see Judah do that with his Canaanite wife before she died, that he saw and he took. You'll see Achan do that. He saw and he took. You'll see David do that with Bathsheba. He saw and he brought. Like, this is just over and over and over. We mentioned that Judges is a time where everyone does that which was right in their own eyes. And then the opposite of that is God always telling his people to do that which is right in my eyes. Right? So, basically, the idea is never see for yourself. This is why Paul will say, don't live by sight, but by faith. That we're not to be earthly people. We're not to be like that. So this is the movement with Saw. And then you'll find glory to flesh. They went from being radiant. Paul says in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So throughout the Old Testament, you'll find the Psalms will say that those who look to the Lord, their faces are radiant. So when you look at God, your face lights up. That's why the priests were anointed. That's why Jesus on the Transfiguration, his clothes are made dazzlingly white. That's when Stephen, when he's being stoned, his face looks like the face of an angel. So you just have all of these things where they have this glory, but then that glory is gone and their flesh is exposed. Okay, so what do they notice? They notice their nakedness. And so we'll see this surface time and time again throughout the scriptures. They'll say that their glory was turned to shame. That tends to be the trajectory. There's countless examples of this. Noah, everything's going great, and he gets drunk and exposes his. Okay. Abram and Sarah, they've got all these promises of God, and Abram gets this. Sarah has this idea. It says she took Hagar and gave to Abram, and he exposes his flesh with Hagar. So time and time again, in the Exodus and the golden calf, they're all wearing the gold jewelry from Egypt, which is shiny. It's like shining gold. And to make the golden calf, Aaron has them take it all off. And then they end up exposing their flesh in what's probably an orgy taking place there from the words used. Okay, so you have this concept where when you sin, your flesh is exposed. When Cain sins, his face is downcast. And so we get to this concept that we've already talked about with adultery, and I think this is where we can finish with adultery and let's see, reactions, maybe, if we get time for it. Okay, so let's camp out here for a second. Okay, so Netzinet, would you look up 2 Corinthians 11? 2 Corinthians 11. Okay, so guys, is adultery at play in Genesis 3? Is adultery going on? Any sense of adultery? So what happened between Eve and the serpent? What happened that the serpent will have? Oh, intimacy? Okay. Is intimacy happening? Yeah, they have offspring together. The serpent and Eve have offspring together. That's how we need to understand this, because that's where the text goes. Okay? So go ahead and read that passage. 11, 2 and 3, I think it is. Okay. So here's Paul talking to the Corinthian church, and he wants to present them like what to Christ? A pure virgin. Okay? So he's speaking in terms of marriage. All right? I want to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. And he says, for I fear that what happened with Eve is happening with you. So how did Paul understand what happened between Eve and the serpent? Adultery. Between Eve and Adam? No. Between Eve and serpent, who is Eve cheating on then? God. Okay, so it's very significant to understand that Eve is representative of humanity as the bride of God. Now, I'm not saying Eve's not a literal person. She was. So was Adam. But it's significant that Eve sins because she is representative of us as the bride of God, or us as the bride of Christ. Okay? So adultery is at play here. Okay? This is a really big thing to catch. Okay, so what I want to do in our remaining time is I want to take this and I want to go to a very strange passage to close things up today. Okay? And that strange passage is in Numbers chapter 5. Okay, so you can turn to Numbers chapter 5. And this is one of those things where, people can come to you and be like, what is this all about? How can you believe this stuff? This is like witchcraft. What's going on here? What happens in Numbers 5? Are you familiar with this thing called the test of adultery? You guys remember reading that? Should I read it again, or are you guys familiar with it? Pretty familiar? Read it again? Okay. Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel. If any man's wife goes astray and breaks faith with him, if a man lies with her sexually, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she is undetected, though she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, since she was not taken in the act, and if the spirit of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife, who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife, though she has not defiled herself, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest, and bring the offering required of her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. He shall pour no oil on it, and put no frankincense on it, for it is a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of remembrance, bringing iniquity to remembrance. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. And the priest shall take the holy water in an earthenware vessel, and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle, and put it into the water. And the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and unbind her hair, unbind the hair of the woman's head, and place in her hands the grain offering of remembrance, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And in his hand the priest shall have the water of bitterness that brings the curse. Then the priest shall make her take an oath, saying, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not turned aside to uncleanness while you were under your husband's authority, be free from this water of bitterness that brings the curse. But if you have gone astray, though you were under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself, and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then let the priest make the woman take the oath of the curse, and say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people, when the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your body swell. May this water that brings the curse pass into your bowels and make your womb swell and your thigh fall away. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. Then the priest shall write these curses in a book and wash them into the water of bitterness. And he shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness that brings the curse. And the water that brings the curse shall enter into her and cause bitter pain. And the priest shall take the grain offering of jealousy out of the woman's hand and shall wave the grain offering before the Lord and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of the grain offering as its memorial portion and burn it on the altar, and afterwards shall make the woman drink the water. And when he has made her drink the water, then if she has defiled herself and has broken faith with her husband, the water that brings the curse shall enter into her and cause bitter pain. And her womb shall swell, and her thigh shall fall away, and the woman shall become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and shall conceive children. This is the law in the case of jealousy, when a wife, through her husband's authority, goes astray and defiles herself, or when the spirit of jealousy comes over a man, and he is jealous of his wife. Then he shall set the woman before the Lord, and the priest shall carry out for her all this law. The man shall be free from iniquity, but the woman shall bear her iniquity. Okay, so does this sound very strange? Okay, does it sound a little bit like witchcraft? Okay, it does. It sounds very odd, okay? So you've got a man, let me just kind of summarize it. You've got a man who's jealous, a spirit of suspicion comes over him about his wife. Of greater or lesser degree of certainty, okay? So, as a result, he takes her to the priest. He takes her to the tabernacle complex. Was that a public thing or a private thing? Okay, it's very public because it's at the center of the camp. So, in everybody's doors, you find in Numbers, open facing the tabernacle. Okay? So everybody's looking. This is totally public. All right? So she goes, and she's to bring a grain offering, a bread offering, but this bread offering is different because it's lacking two things that are normally in a grain offering, which is oil and frankincense, which make the grain offering taste good and smell good. Okay? So this is a bread offering that's like a bitter or not good bread offering. Because is this a not good situation or a good situation? It's a not good situation. Okay. So she brings this. The priest takes holy water. So where would he get holy water? From the tabernacle complex. From the laver, right? That's filled with water. And so he does it in an earthenware cup. Okay, so an earthenware vessel. Then what does he do with that water? Okay, before he does that, he takes a little dust from the tabernacle floor and he puts it in this water. Okay? And then he writes an oath, and he takes that oath and he rubs part of the oath off, and it goes into the drink, this cocktail, okay, of dust and the writing. It goes into this cup, okay? So he gives that to her. He has her let her hair down, which was not a public thing. It was a private thing. But now she's doing it publicly. She lets her hair down. and she recites the oath. She drinks the water. He takes the bread offering, and the priest offers it. And if she was adulterous, what's probably indicated is she becomes barren. Like then, right then. Something happens inside her womb that makes her barren. Okay? And if she's innocent, it says the man is guilty of iniquity. So he put his wife through this wrongly and shamed her, and he's guilty of sin. And if that's the case, it says she shall bear children. In other words, she will have kids, right? And God will vindicate her out of this. So no one will wonder, was she guilty? So like it's almost like if she actually was like Sarah and barren, and her husband thought she was adulterous and did this, it's like she would stop being barren because God won't let her be shamed after going through this, okay? All right, now, that's the summary of the ritual. And you read that and you think, okay, this is very strange. It came out of nowhere. But it didn't come out of nowhere, okay? If we read our Bibles rightly, you'll find it has a perfect place. You should have seen this ritual coming, actually. Okay? So you look back. Did Eve commit adultery with the serpent? Yes or no? Yes. It's indicated because the serpent has offspring. So then God judges the serpent, Eve, and Adam. They're all complicit in this adulteristic affair because Eve represented the bride, who was Adam, actually, too, of God. Okay? We're the bride of Christ. It's weird because we're men, but that's what we are. Okay? That's what the Bible calls us. All right. So, he judges the serpent, Eve, and Adam. And you'll find something that surfaces in the Numbers ritual from each of their judgments. Where do we find in the serpent's judgment that shows up in the test of adultery? Anything? What about the dust? Eat the dust. Adultery just took place. Someone that was guilty in the adultery is ingesting dust. What about Eve? Anything in Eve's discipline that surfaces in the test of adultery? She will have difficulty in childbearing. Do you see how that fits into the Numbers test of adultery? She will become barren. So there's a similarity there. Okay, what about Adam? What about Adam's discipline? You will eat bread by the sweat of your brow. Okay? So you have liquid, just bear with me. You've got liquid and you've got bread. Is that bread a good bread or a bad bread? Is it an easy bread or a hard bread? It's a hard bread. Okay? Okay. So you've got eating dust, difficulty childbearing, liquid, and hard bread, difficult bread. Okay? Now, fast forward to Israel's fall in Exodus 32 with the golden calf. They erect this golden calf, okay? It's an animal like the serpent, you know. So they erect this golden calf. Is that committing adultery? Yeah, because what's Moses doing on Mount Sinai with God? Forming covenant. It's like their wedding night. It's like they're getting married, okay? And he tells Moses, you got to go down because my bride, he doesn't say my bride, but it's indicated, is breaking loose, okay? All right, so they go down, he goes down, and he finds that they rose up to play. Did that ever sound strange to you? They rose up to play? Like, what are they doing? Playing checkers? Chess? Okay, well, that Hebrew word is the word. Remember when Isaac tells Abimelech, hey, Rebecca's just my sister. Okay? And then Abimelech looks out his window and sees Isaac and Rebecca playing. Are they playing checkers? Because whatever they're doing tells Abimelech that's not his sister. So, do brothers and sisters play chess? They do. So that wouldn't have indicated that that's his sister. That's not his sister. Do brothers and sisters fondle each other? No, hopefully, right? So this tells them that they are not siblings. They are husband and wife, okay? Rising up to play, that's what Israel's doing. It says that they broke loose. They broke loose. That is the same word that's used for the woman in Numbers 5 letting loose her hair. Okay? So what does Moses do? He comes down the mountain. What does he do to the calf? He burns it. And then what does he do? He crushes it to dust. And then, by the way, right before that, he breaks the tablets. Okay? So he breaks the tablets probably close to the brook that he throws the dust into. Okay? So think of the oath that's written, like the Ten Commandments, and then broken near the water, like it's washed off into the cocktail. Okay? Then he takes the dust, and what does he do? Throws it in the water, and then what does he do? He makes Israel drink it. Okay. Do you find how each of those things fit into the Numbers 5 ritual? Okay. So you've got an unfaithful bride, potentially, who lets her hair down like they let their hair down. They're at play. There's adultery going on, intimacy going on. He puts the dust in the brook and has them drink it. And then as a result, it's after this, a lot of people die from a plague. So their futures are jeopardized. Okay? So in that, do you see how the Numbers 5 ritual, which is an adultery ritual, has antecedents in Genesis 3 and Exodus 32? And here's the thing, because people could say, why does the husband have an opportunity to test his wife, but the wife doesn't have an opportunity to test her husband if he's cheating on her? That's not fair. Well, here'd be my answer to that. I think it's Leviticus 20:10 gives husbands and wives the exact same punishment if they're caught in adultery. It's capital punishment. They're both to be killed, either one, male, female. So there's no greater punishment for the woman or the man. So why is the woman singled out in this ritual? I think this woman is singled out in this ritual in the same way that Eve's the one that sinned. Israel should have looked at this ritual and said, that's us. Like we are to be faithful to our God in the way that we hope our wives are faithful to us. Okay? All right. Now, we'll close with this. All right. Is there any way, shape, or form this finds fulfillment in Jesus? Can you think of any situation where adultery of some sort, sexual deviancy is at play, where Jesus confronts it? Woman at the well. Yes, very good. Excellent. Okay. Here's the text I'm thinking of. Okay. So there's a couple instances of that. There's one in John, and then there's one in Luke. And I think they're different. They have similarities, but I think they're two different occasions. Okay? The one that I'm thinking about is from Luke chapter 7. Okay? So in Luke chapter 7, Simon the Pharisee is holding a feast. Okay? And Jesus is there. All right? So, you've got food Is there probably bread there? There's probably bread there. Okay? So you got a feast. A woman comes to it that's sexually deviant. She's an unclean woman, and Simon's very suspicious of her, which means that she's probably a what? A prostitute. Okay? She comes in to Jesus, and she's got an earthenware vessel. It's an alabaster jar. Okay? That's from the earth. All right. She pours out oil on Jesus. Are his feet clean? No, because we'll see that he condemns Simon for not washing his feet. So what are his feet? They're dusty. Okay? And what does John tell us, by the way? Jesus came to what among us? To tabernacle among us. So you've got Jesus, who is the tabernacle, and what's he got on his feet? Dust from the tabernacle floor. She lowers her hair because she's washing his feet with her hair. It doesn't tell you like it lowers her hair like the one in John does, but we know she does because she's washing his feet with her hair, it says. Is there water present? Her tears, like Adam's sweat, her tears are over Jesus' feet. Does that water mingled with dust touch her mouth? Because she's kissing his feet. Okay. Is this a public situation? Yeah, it's a meal. People are invited. Is a judgment pronounced by God? Like in Numbers 5. She'll either be barren or, yeah. A judgment is pronounced. He calls her saved. Your faith has saved you, and go in peace. Is there a suspecting man present? Simon, he's a suspecting man. What's he saying? If he knew who this was, he wouldn't let her be doing this to him. Okay? She's pronounced clean. Is the man judged? Is he guilty of iniquity? Simon? Yeah. Jesus goes on to condemn Simon and says, when I entered, you didn't wash my feet. So Simon's condemned. Okay. So guys, here's the summary. Israel ended up being an adulterous bride. In Luke's gospel, time and time again, they didn't receive John the Baptist. They didn't receive Jesus. And Jesus says, you guys are like I came and you were playing a dirge and you wanted me to mourn and I didn't mourn. And you were playing a song and you wanted me to dance and I didn't dance. You didn't like John, you didn't like me. So they are an adulterous bride that did not receive their betrothed, their husband. But if they come to him like this true adulterer woman, this prostitute, if they come to him appropriately, their sins will be forgiven. But if they don't come to him appropriately, they will be judged, like Simon, and ultimately pronounced barren. What you find is exactly what happens with Israel, that they are not fruitful, and so he's going to give the kingdom to a people that bear fruit, which are those who follow him, like this woman. Okay, so guys, this is the way that we have to start wrestling with these passages and connect. Okay, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that, and find a way to step back and say, this is like that. And find that unity, ultimately culminating in who? Jesus Christ. That's the goal of all of the scriptures, to point us to him. That's it.